Following the agreement in Brussels last week that sufficient progress had been made on Phase 1 talks. The Prime Minister will today be meeting with her Brexit cabinet to discuss the next phase. But tomorrow she will meet with the whole cabinet to discuss the end state for the UK's relationship with the EU. And they aren't exactly singing from the same hymn sheet. Her Chancellor, Philip Hammond, said that the UK's relationship with the EU would be largely unchanged and that we will effectively recreate the status quo. Boris Johnson, meanwhile, believes the UK needs something new and ambitious, giving zero tariffs and frictionless trade, as well as the freedom to decide our own regulatory framework. Theresa May herself has said that she wants a new deep and special partnership with the EU and ruled out EEA-style membership. The EU have their own ideas for Brexit, where the EU's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, said there is no way the UK will be allowed to cherry-pick and have a bespoke deal with the EU. Jeremy Corbyn is also under pressure from his shadow cabinet over the issue of a second referendum. The Labour Party does not support one, claimed Shadow Home Secretary Diane Abbott. But on the same topic, Deputy Leader Tom Watson said you shouldn't rule anything out. Well, let's speak to our political correspondent, Ben Wright. Ben, another busy Brexit week. But realistically, what is going to be agreed and changed this week?
Very little, I think, really, Joe. These are preliminary discussions by the Cabinet. Amazingly, it is the first time that the Cabinet has formally got together and talked about its view regarding the final trading position that the government wants between the EU and the UK after Brexit, 18 months on from the referendum. But these are discussions, I think, that might make the discussions around Phase 1, the money, the rights of EU citizens, look like a picnic. There are big disagreements within the Cabinet about the fundamental sort of trading relationship the UK should be looking for. And as you said, there is also quite a big disagreement at the moment, it seems, between the UK and the EU starting points. The UK, Theresa May, is quite clear she wants something very bespoke, something that combines the best of sort of Norwegian-style access to the single market with a Canadian free trade agreement. The EU so far is saying that that's just simply not on the cards. You've got to take something based on a model that already exists. So they're starting quite far apart. Time is short as well, because the EU are going to come forward with their proposal, we think, their starting position by March, their new negotiating mandate. So the government has to work pretty quickly on this.
What about the Cabinet? How far apart are they in terms of that future relationship?
Well, we believe that there are some significant differences, crucially around the question of how much convergence there should be with the EU's regulatory system after Brexit. Of course, at the moment, there's complete convergence because we're in the single market. And I think the fundamental issue is how much EU cabinet ministers, our cabinet ministers are willing to accept that in the future, after we've left, the the EU and the UK will start to diverge, and how that will be managed, what mechanisms will be in place. This is big fundamental stuff, and I think there are those on Philip Hammond's side of the argument, I think, who want as much single market access as possible with the potential conditions and obligations that will involve, and others like Michael Gove and Boris Johnson who want more of a clean break and perhaps as a consequence have more freedom for the UK to do its own trade deals as a member, as a country no longer in the European Union. So I think there are some quite fundamental differences on how they will be approaching this question.
Ben Wright, thank you very much. Suella Fernandez, at the weekend, Philip Hammond said that our future relationship with the EU will leave us largely unchanged and effectively recreate the status quo. Do you agree with him?
Well, I think in some respects there will be things we want to maintain with the EU. We want to maintain our commerce with the EU. We want to maintain a trading relationship. We're one of the biggest customers to EU countries of their goods. And for sure, we definitely want to keep that going. But there are definitely areas that we will want to diverge on. We want to come out of the common commercial policy, which restricts our ability to design our own trade vision for the UK.
But Philip Hammond is saying that that actually, in reality, won't happen. He says the UK won't technically or legally be in the customs union or the single market, but we've committed as a result of the agreement we've made this week, at the end of last week, to creating an environment which will effectively recreate the status quo, what we have now.
Well, I think, to just correct you, The Chancellor has also said that we will be leaving the customs union.
No, that's what he said. There's nothing incorrect, but that's his quote.
He's definitely said we're going to be leaving the customs union, we're leaving the single market as
Technically
part of our withdrawal.
And legally, but in reality, it'll effectively be the same. Is he wrong?
The effect of leaving the customs union is that we will have freedom over our trade policy. We won't be bound by the common commercial policy. We won't be subject to the subject to the common external tariff, which applies to goods coming into the EU. So those are all
Will
benefits.
we during the transition period?
Well, that is all going to be contingent, really, the implementation period, I should say, which is all contingent on what the end state is. And so it's almost impossible, actually, to design an implementation period before you've agreed the final outcome. And that's all subject to the negotiations.
Well, you signed a letter in September saying that the UK must not pay into the EU budget during a transition implementation period and must be able to sign trade deals, free trade deals, from March 2019. But we are going to be paying into the EU budget and we aren't going to be able to sign free trade deals in March 2019. Are you happy with that?
I didn't sign a letter in November, so that's incorrect.
Well, you're chair of the European Research Group who circulated a letter from Change Britain asking for support from Conservative MPs to back those points.
Yes. What's been agreed is that we are going to be contributing as part of the financial settlement, which has been agreed by Theresa May, and I support the agreement that's come forward in the last week or so from Theresa May, because that represents progress. It enables us to move on to the next stage, and nothing is agreed until everything agreed, and that is a crucial part of the whole deal.
But you have accepted that we will be paying into the EU budget and that we won't be able to sign those FTAs, those free trade agreements, in March 2019?
No, we are making contributions as are legally required by us under the multi-annual financial framework and other bases which are founded in law. And we will be leaving the customs union in 2019. And I think, as we'll hear from Theresa May later today, or from the government later today, there will be clarity on what our position is in terms of designing that trade deal. Otherwise, the work of Liam Fox becomes completely redundant. A whole department has been set up. Extensive energies have been put into scoping out our potential deals with other third-party countries. All of that is necessary, and it's not in vain. The Prime Minister herself took a trip to India very recently on a mission to look at what options there are for a trade deal. None of that means anything if we're not out of the customs union and if we're not able to look at trade deals after 2019.
So look at trade deals and scoping trade deals, but there won't be any signed beyond or until March 2019.
I am open to what... I'm not going to sit here and tie the Prime Minister's hands at all on anything. I think this is all subject to negotiation. What is agreed, what is clear government policy and garners the unanimous support of the government is that we are leaving these blocks which do tie our hands, which do restrict us from exploring other trade routes and being a global leader in free trade.
Right, you did set out some red lines beforehand, so you're not going to make that a red line about having Britain sign free trade deals during the next few years?
I think it's very important that we are, after 2019, able to make concrete progress, tangible progress and advance negotiations with other countries outside the EU. That is one of the biggest prizes that we stand to gain from our departure from the EU, and I'm confident that the government is pursuing that aim as well.
Stephen, do you think Brexit has actually been softened up in the last few weeks?
I think that we've seen a series of reality checks, and the government's approach to Brexit has been a mixture of bluster, posture, and then capitulate.
But they've got an agreement.
But every single red line goes up in smoke when it comes into the first contact with reality. First of all, they said the talks should be, the divorce talks should be in parallel with the trade talks. That row was going to be the row of the summer. It lasted until about lunchtime on the first day. They now recognise the need for a transition deal. The transition deal is going to be a carbon copy of the status quo. The only thing that we'll not have is a seat at the table. So if that's take back control, I'm not quite sure what that really means. But
materially,
So
we know that the Prime Minister is sticking to her guns that she set out in Lancaster House and Florence speeches. The UK will leave the single market and will leave the customs union, and she will not sign up or sign the country up to anything that looks like the European Economic Area.
But that is not going to happen. The transition deal will be a carbon copy of the status quo. That's not up for negotiation. The European Union has been absolutely clear. If you read the resolution
beyond
from
the
European
transition,
Parliament,
though, she is saying will not be part of the European Economic Area.
Beyond the transition, which could last, well, much longer than 2 years, by the way, I do think that that is up for negotiation. I think that we'd be much better off committing to the European Economic Area. It does actually give you maximum market access, but also the opportunity to control free movement of labour. Articles 112 and 113 of the EEA agreement.
Well, you say that, but of course David Cameron
clearly
did fail to get anything further than he actually wanted when it came to migration. Do you think the Labour Party is moving to your position now beyond the implementation period of actually remaining in the single market and the customs union in some sort of replica to the European Economic Area?
What I'm very keen to emphasise is the European Economic Area is not the same as the single market. You're not in the common agricultural policy, you're not in the common fisheries policy, you're not subject to ECJ jurisdiction.
But you can't sign free trade agreements if you're part of the customs union.
Well, if you move into EFTA as well, my pitch is EFTA, European Free Trade Association, and the EEA, EFTA countries can sign bilateral free trade deals. Iceland has a bilateral trade deal with China. So I think we've got to understand that there is a way through this, which is about squaring the circle between market access and regulatory control. EFTA EEA is clearly the best way to do it. There's a clear majority for that in Parliament, and I hope that that's the way the country will go, because otherwise we're going off the edge of a cliff.
Do you think that's acceptable and would be acceptable, bearing in mind the result of the referendum?
Well, Stephen's proposal of EEA or EFTA membership, to my mind, isn't acceptable, and that's been ruled out by the Prime Minister, because with that comes accepting free movement of people, and that was an important aspect. And you say that Article 112 is a mechanism to control free movement, but the only example we have of that is Liechtenstein, a population of 37,000 people, a very small mileage of space, square mileage of space, and used only in very, very exceptional circumstances where there was a serious risk, to the economy or the society, in which case controls over migration were allowed. It is not the same as Britain's population, 65 million people, a larger landmass, and where we can't really say there is a serious risk posed by EU migrants, because our employment is very high, our GDP is good. So I don't think Article 112, the proposal you make out, is a viable option for the UK.
And so isn't it a case that we could end up in a situation where the UK becomes a vassal state? In fact, your colleague Barry Gardiner used that expression of the EU. We take all the rules and regulations, but we don't have any input. We don't sit at the table.
Well, 2 points on that. First of all, the transition period, we're going to be taking absolutely everything from the single market and the customs union, just won't have a seat at the table. So I think, look, I mean, I campaign passionately for Remain, and I think it's a great pity that the UK won't stay in the EU. This is a case now of what do we do, given the fact we must accept and respect the result of the referendum. And I think there's a way through this which does actually give us a real opportunity to reform free movement of labour, but also doesn't wreck the British economy by coming out of the single...
on that, what is Labour's policy on having a second referendum?
We are not supporting a second referendum. I think there's very valid reasons for not supporting one, not least because I think if it had been 52% Remain, 48% Leave, we would have accepted those on the Leave. We would have expected those on the Leave side to accept the result.
So why does the Deputy Leader Tom Watson think Labour shouldn't rule anything out, even when it comes to a second referendum?
Look, I mean, as John Maynard Keynes famously said, when the facts change, I change my mind. There are new facts coming to light. Clearly, if we leave the European Union, for example, we leave the European Union in March 2019, and we see a massive damaging impact on the economy, which many people predict will be the case. I don't really believe so much in forecasts and predictions. I think we have to see where we are. But if we are seeing, thousands of jobs going down the drain, we're seeing foreign direct investment drying up. We're seeing market access being severely limited.
Then you'll change your mind.
I mean, any responsible government, whoever is in government at that time, it's the responsibility of that government to act in the national interest.
Michel Barnier, Suella Fernandez, said that the UK will not get a bespoke deal. No way. The UK cannot cherry-pick. We can't have a Norway-style agreement without freedom of movement and the whole flexibility of the Canada deal taking in services. What do you say to him?
Well, I do think that this is the first time a nation has left the EU, so I think that we have to be open to building what might not be there might not be a particular model for it. But I do think the Canada agreement, which was struck with the EU last year, does provide some really good grounds for optimism.
Yeah, but he says you're not going to have that.
Well, I don't know. I mean, he says that, but it is all dependent on many people involved in this process. The Canada agreement was mutually signed up to by both sides. It's beneficial for both.
Right, but it didn't take in services, did it? And that's the point of that agreement, and that would be a major disadvantage for the UK economy.
And that's why we can't just copy and paste Canada and say it's applicable to the UK. It does have some good points, like an elimination of tariffs on many industrial goods, agricultural products. But as you say, it doesn't quite cover services, and as 80% of our economy is services, that would be a great opportunity for us to.
So are you worried that he says we're not going to get it?
Not at all. I'm not worried at all. I think I'm actually very optimistic, contrary to how Stephen feels. I think there's been huge progress which has been made in showing that both sides really want to strike agreement on what have been said to be very complex issues. And I think that bodes very well for the future prospects of negotiation.
What do you make of the arguments that some of your colleagues should be deselected for rebelling on the EU withdrawal bill last week? Are you supportive of that?
No, I'm not. I think that they are colleagues, and I take them at face value. They've said that they wanted to improve the legislation. It's disappointing that the government lost the vote on Amendment 7, but I think that we can all move forward, and this is a continuing dialogue, and the government is listening to many members who have tabled amendments, responding substantively, and as a result, producing a bill which I think reflects many concerns in Parliament.
So you don't see them as traitors in the way they've been portrayed by some of your other colleagues?
I don't think it's fair to, demonise them at all for carrying out something that they feel passionate about.
Did your constituents actually vote for a continuation of what Labour now seems to be calling easy movement of people, whatever that means?
No, I think those who voted leave, in many cases they were motivated by concerns about free movement of labour. Again, I would say that there is a real opportunity here through the European Economic Area to pull the emergency brake and to put a reformed system in place. There is clear legal precedent for doing it, and we would be coming out of the European Union, so renegotiating on a very different basis to the one that Mr Cameron was trying to push through back in 2016. So I think there is a way of allaying concerns on different sides here, but we need a sensible, pragmatic approach, not one that's driven by the ideology of certain backbenchers in the Conservative Party.
And for more reporting and analysis of Brexit, check out the BBC News website. That's bbc.co.uk/Brexit.